Welcome back to this Parallax landing page build. Last time we built out this cool slider that will actually kind of see when things are in the viewport and then disable these buttons when you need to. This time what we're going to do is work on the rest of the markup for the page. So we'll add all the HTML and the Tailwind classes for this section and down here and for the footer. So that's what we're going to do this time, and then in the next video we'll actually add functionality for this so that it kind of pretends to accept an email address. All right, let's pull over this way. And I'm going to switch back to the one we're actually working on right here. I've gone ahead and started up my dev server. And now what I want to do is just inside of this wrapping div, you might remember there's a div that wraps the entire page. We're going to add another section. So we'll say section here, and this will say aria labeled by, and we'll point this to an ID of map. And then let's go ahead and just tack on lots of different classes. So we do want this to be a container, and it will have a class of flex because the map and that text are going to flex with each other and wrap. So by default, I'll say flex wrap. And then now I need to decide when they're sitting next to each other, how much space should be taken up between them. So we can do that with a media query. We'll do for the medium breakpoint, we'll do space x16, which is, I believe, 4 rem. And then we'll do space y 12. So it'll always be 3 rem up and down. Once I get to medium screen size, though, I don't need that y anymore. So I can say 0. And then whatever way it's facing, I want it to be justify between and align items center. All right, now we're going to have 2 sections here. We'll have an image. This will be our map. And then just below this, we will have a div. Now this div is going to hold a lot of the same content we had up in some of these upper sections here, but this image will be pointing to our map. So let's go to images, and then I'll look for my map PNG. We'll just call this something like, well, we'll call it map. How about that? Let's go ahead and set a width on here of 400, so that's how it loads in. And then we'll give it some classes here. I want it to grow, so try to take up as much space as it can. Once it gets to the medium breakpoint, however, I'll set it to flex of 1, which as you can see is flex 1, 1, and 0%. So that's flex grow, flex shrink, and then 0% for the basis. Now because this is further down in the viewport, we can add one more thing here, and that would be, we can say loading equals lazy. So this will just by default wait to load this until it's in the viewport or getting close to it. And in fact, while we're at it, let's go ahead and add this to all the images up above from last time. So I'll come up here and let's go ahead and grab this first image right here. We'll just grab anything with that. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm just holding down Command D each time I want to select a new one. And I think that gets us to all of ours. And we'll come inside this tag and just paste that here. Now, one thing I want to mention on this very last one here that we didn't do that we need to do, this last section from last time, if I'm on a smaller screen size, so let's get to a smaller screen size here, what I want is when it's on a smaller screen size, if I get to this final one, I want the final one to take up the full viewport width. And you can see here that it kind of leaves this awkward edge off to the side. So let's go ahead and on this last one, get rid of this. And that way, as we move over, if I can speed up in editing, you can see there that that now takes up the entire viewport width. All right, let's go ahead and kill this and come back to where our map is in view. I'm going to add some classes to this div. We want this itself to be a grid with a gap of 4. This is very similar to some of those other text blocks up above. Text center once we get to medium, text left, again, all stuff we've done before. But now we want it to grow, and then on medium to go also and share that flex 1 so that they should share equal space on medium. Now, because this text is going to be very similar to up above, let's go ahead and just grab all of that from the top here. So if I can find something, yeah, right here. So like this stuff right here, we're going to just copy this down and we'll paste it down here and just change out some of the text. So let's go ahead and change out this text. This here should say a globe of possibilities. Here we'll have an H2, and in the middle, we're going to actually add a manual break. So it always breaks that happy travelers the world over. And then here's the paragraph. Now, because I have this pointing to a map as the ID here, this section, let's go ahead and change this to map. And then now that we're definitely down in the section where we don't need this anymore, I can go ahead and delete this because the backdrop is that same black color. So we should be good there. And that means I can also delete it right here. I will go ahead and add in a max width for this paragraph text though. So I'll say max width 2XL, and that way it doesn't stretch too far once these things are trying to share space. Finally, when these things snap, I'm going to have that green bar off to the side. So this needs to have a class of relative because it'll just be next to these two this time rather than the entire section. And then I'll go ahead and look up top. I think we had something like negative left 4. Yeah, here. So let's grab this right here and we'll head back down. And right inside this relative, we'll paste that in. Now, because this thing flexes on medium, I'm going to change this one media query to medium as well. And now let's inspect that work and just make sure it's working. So it looks great on mobile. I should come over here and yeah, now it snaps. Great. Now the spacing is a little bit weird here, and I think that just means that maybe I left out a closing div tag. Nope, that doesn't seem to be it. Okay, so let's see what's going on. All right, so that works. I think all I did was forget that the wrapper was around the main as well. All right, let me clean some of this up and I'll be right back with you. All right, now I've closed all of those sections up above and everything should be working. If I come back over here and I close that down, now my spacing is correct. All right, and then let's expand this out and there we go. So everything's snapping just as we'd expect. That's what we want it to look like. It eventually will come up like this. Perfect. All right, now down below, we're gonna do a lot of the same stuff. So let's go ahead and copy the entire section. So I'm gonna grab all this, hit Option, Shift, and the down arrow, and then we'll just alter this slightly. So we'll come in here and we're gonna change this to point to CTA, which means we need to give this H2 an ID of CTA. And then inside here, we'll change this to say it's time to explore. And we'll change out this H2 text to say get hidden locations. Now, I actually don't need this, this left-hand block, so I can get rid of that. And I can also get rid of this class of relative. Additionally, I don't need this image, so that can be gone. And same thing with this div, this wrapper div, I also don't need that. So now I've just got the section with this text up above. Rather than this being a Flux container then, let's go ahead and get rid of a lot of these things. This can just be grid with a gap of 4 and text center. Then I'll set a max width here of max width prose, which is a nice reading length that wraps the line at 65 characters. All right, now let's change out this text right here. And then in order to keep this in the very center, we do actually need to add MX auto on this, which is margin left and right auto. Below the paragraph, we will go ahead and add a form. This is where we'll input that person's email address and handle it. So I don't need an action on this because it's just going to be a fake form. But we will go ahead and add a contact form ID. When it comes to the classes for this form, however, we want a border around it of 4, which is 4 pixels, and then I'll add border accent so that the color comes through. Let's actually come over here just so we can see it. There it is. There's nothing going on in there yet. Let's do rounded full, padding 1, so now it'll get a little bit of height. And then if I move over to the finished example here, we're going to have 2 different things. So we've got the email address itself. So let's arrange those in a Flex container. So let's add that class of Flex. We'll keep everything in the center with a line item center, and then justify between. We'll push those things as far as they can within that form. So on the left will be the placeholder and input, and on the right will be that button. Let's set a max width here of MD. And as you can see there, that's 448 pixels. And then finally, let's set it to the middle. So MX auto. Now in here, we're going to have an input. We'll also have a label, and then we'll also have a button. Let's start with the input. This will be a type of email, and that will give us some validation to start with. We'll make sure it's required so that they have to enter this in. And then let's add a placeholder. This will say email address. Next, for some classes, let's have padding 2 all the way around. And then left and right, let's give it margin of 4. We want the background to be transparent. Let's make sure it stretches the full width as it can, and we'll give it a small text size. Next, as a Flex child, I want this to be Flex 1. We're going to give it a border bottom of 2. We'll do border transparent for the color because we're going to just show that only when it's actually selected. And because there can be some weird rounding on like iOS and things like that, let's say rounded is none. Next, when you're inputting text, it's nice when the cursor color actually matches the theme of the site. So let's go ahead and change that to carrot accent. And as you can see, that changes the carrot color to our accent color. Now we've got a couple ancillary styles. So like for the placeholder itself, we can say placeholder and then do a colon. And this pseudo selector will allow us to style the text of that placeholder. So we'll say text white. And then when we focus in on this input, we want the placeholder to then move to text muted. Finally, let's add 2 different things for the focus state on the actual input field itself. So we'll say focus. First of all, we're going to remove the outline, the default outline, to outline none, so it doesn't have kind of that weird blue border around it. And instead, now place a color on that bottom border that's already there but transparent. So we'll say focus, border, accent. If we did that correctly and I come over this way, now when I click in here, I got this bottom border and the text here turns to that muted color. All right, next let's come in here to the label. Now here I just want this to be accessible to screen readers. So I just want it to be a little bit more accessible so they know exactly what's going on here. So enter your email address, and this may not be strictly necessary, but we'll point it to the ID of email. In order for that to actually pick up something, I also need to come up here and add that ID of email so that these 2 things will be tied together. And then let's go ahead and add a class. And this is something Tailwind gives us, a utility class that adds a bunch of things, but we're going to say screen reader only. And basically it moves it so where you can't see it, but it is able to be interacted with by screen readers. All right, finally for this button, I actually think it might make sense to go ahead and copy the one we've got up above. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to scroll to the top of the page, and this is inside of our header. And here we've got it as a link because it's actually pointing to our contact form. We'll have to obviously change that around. So let's close down this header just to keep everything nice and neat. And then I'm going to just drop this in place of this. And let's change this out for a button. And buttons don't need hrefs, so we can get rid of that. And then let's change around a few classes. So this padding left and right of 8 will only be on small screen sizes and above. For anything smaller than that, we'll just have a padding left and right of 4, which is 1 rem. I also want to change the text size here, so we'll say text of small. A lot of the rest of this will work just fine, but we're not going to have a drop shadow, so let's go ahead and get rid of all of these right here. And then I do want to make sure this doesn't shrink, so I'll say shrink of 0 because we don't want this to shrink as a flex child. To get access to this in JavaScript, we're going to need an ID. So we'll say contact button will be our ID. And then let's change this text to say sign up. Now we also do not need this SVG anymore. We're going to add a different SVG. So let's come back to our phosphor icons over here. We'll search for like mail or something like that. Let's see, let's use this paper plane. I'm going to copy the SVG here and paste it in. Now, much like we've done before, we're going to go ahead and change out several things. So let's grab all 3 of those and let's change this to current color so we can control that with the text of the button itself. And then I'll change the width and the height, both of these to 24. And let's add one class just to make sure that we can't click on it accidentally. So this will be pointer events none. All right, and if we did all of that correctly, if I come all the way back over here, you can see there it is right here. It's got this nice hover state. If I focus in on it, it gets a nice border so I can tell that I'm focused. And as I move this out, it should all stay in the middle here, but it should expand to fill the available space. All right, that leaves just one section then, if I'm counting everything correctly, and that is the footer. So let's go ahead and close this down so that we can kind of keep stuff as organized as possible. And I'll also close this one down. All right, so this will be outside of the main because it's not the main content, it's the footer. I'm going to come in here with the footer and we'll add a border top to it. And then let's give that a color of border accent. Because I've lost my natural spacing with that grid child-parent relationship, I need to add this back in now manually. So we'll do margin top 16, and this is just mimicking those gaps we set in place for everything inside the main content. On small screen sizes, we'll have a margin top 24. On large screen sizes, we will have a margin top of 40. Finally, to keep everything spaced out, let's do a padding Y of 6 up and down. For small screen sizes, we'll do a padding Y of 8. And for medium screen sizes, we'll do a padding Y of 12. Now, if we go to the finalized example over here, you're going to see that the footer kind of has 2 basic sections. So we've got this section here and then this section here. And if I move this out, then they start to spread out and these kind of stay hugged to the right and this stays hugged to the left. So let's go ahead and account for all of that as we build this out. We'll put all the content inside of the footer inside of a div with a class of container. It'll be a flex child with flex wrap enabled. And then on medium screen sizes, we want it to be justified between. We want it to be items center, and then on medium screen sizes to be items start. Once again, there's 2 sections inside of this wrapper. The first will be a div that holds the logo and kind of the branding description. So I'll say grid and gap of 2. We'll have a grow, so it tries to take up its available space. We'll set the basis to full, so it tries to take up the full width as possible. And then once it gets to medium screen sizes, we'll set the basis to 1/4. And I can't quite expand that with Emmet, so I can come in here and just add the 1/4 afterward. So we might need to make a couple of adjustments there, but let's go ahead and look at our image. And what we're looking for is our logo color right here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy all of this, and we'll just paste it directly in there. Once again, we're pasting it all in there just to make sure that we don't have to load something externally. Now, I do actually have an ARIA label already on this, so assistive technology will know what this is. Next, though, I want to add some classes, so I'm going to say it needs to be a width of 32, and then we can basically change this as we get a little bit bigger. So on small screen sizes, we'll go 48, and on large screen sizes, we'll go 56. All right, let's close this down because it's kind of big and hard to see, and I'll move this in here. And then next, we're going to have a paragraph here, and this will be similar to a lot of our other paragraphs, so text muted. Here, I want the text to be small, text center, and then on medium, I'll have text left. And what do I want this to say? Well, we curate unique experiences, add a line break for the adventurous traveler. All right, so that's our first section, and let's just scroll down to make sure that looks okay. It does not. Okay, well, let's make a couple of adjustments then. Let's see, because it's in this parent container, this is sticking to the left, this is in the middle. So let's go ahead and make a couple of other adjustments. And let's say justify items center, and then when we get to medium screen sizes, we'll do justify items start. And let's just make sure that that's working. If I move this out, okay, so that should snap over that way. Okay, cool. So this section right here is done. Let's now add all of the other text that will be in the footer. And this will actually be in another nav tag. Now that I've got a nav tag up top and one here as well, I need to make sure I give this an ARIA label so that it can distinguish between the two. So let's call this something like secondary navigation, although to be fair, this has way more navigation than the top one. So maybe this one should be the primary, but I'll leave that to you. Let's actually add some classes as well. So I want all the text to be small. I do want it to be flex with flex column as the default. That will stack everything up and down. Then let's align items to the center, and that way all the text will be central on smaller screen sizes. When I get to small screen sizes, however, I want the items to be start. I also, on small screen sizes, want to switch it so that it's flex row. With the text itself, I want it to be centered on the small screen sizes, but once I get up to my small breakpoint, switch over to text left. Now, whether it's up and down or left and right, I want it to have space between the items. So we'll do space X of 6, and we'll also do space Y of 6. With the flex column originally set up, I want this to be justified between to start with, and then when we get to medium screen sizes, we'll change this to justify around. Now this nav itself is also a flex child, so I want it to grow, and I want the basis to be full, and when I get to medium, I want the basis to be 1/2. Finally, to make sure it aligns a little bit better with the way I've got that logo designed, I'm going to add a margin top of 2. Now let's actually start adding some stuff in here so we can see what this is supposed to look like. We'll have 3 columns essentially inside of here. That'll all be a grid div with a gap of 3. At the top, I'll have a paragraph for each of them. That'll have font bold. We'll make sure that they're underlined. I can set the underline color with decoration accent. And I can set the decoration width with decoration and then give it a number like 4 for 4 pixels. And then I can move that decoration off with underline offset 2. Finally, I want tracking Y just to give it a little bit more breathing room in the letter spacing. And let's call this first one about. All right, expanded all that out, and that should work. And if I save it and come over here, there it is. So it's a little spaced out, got this nice underline underneath it. Now the list of items will be in a UL, and here I'm going to give it an ARIA label that will say something like about traverse. That way when screen readers look at this, it'll actually read that text out. Let's go ahead and close the sidebar. I'm not sure why I still have that open, and zoom in just a touch to make sure you can see. Each of these items inside of here, of course, will be LIs, and they'll all be links that, for now, will point exactly 0 places, and then this one will say about us. All of these links will share the same exact classes as well. By default, they're already text white because that's what I've got set on the entire body, but when I hover over them, I want them to change to text accent. And then let's add a transition just on the colors, and that way that color transition will be pretty smooth. Finally, let's set up our own custom focus state again. So I'll do focus, outline, none, and then on focus visible, I want a ring of 4. We'll make sure that the ring is offset whenever it's visible by 2, and I can set that offset color again with ring offset and then give it a color name like background. Finally, when the ring is visible, I want it to have a color of accent, and to make sure that it matches the rest of the branding, I'll set this to rounded of full. So if I save that and come over here, let's just make sure that's working properly right here. There we go. Now just to give it a little bit more space, why don't we add a padding left and right of 4 as well. And now if I come in here, it's got a little bit more space to breathe. I'm noticing that my text is not centered, and I think that's because I've got text centered as a class, which does not exist, but text center does. Okay, cool. So now that should be working. Now all I'm going to do is copy this exact same thing down and change out the text for the rest of these in this column. All right, so if I come over here, now I've got about us, press, and news. And again, if I come and focus on those, they should all be the exact same. If I go to my final example here, I've got the exact same thing, just again with locations, contact us. Why don't I just do that real quickly? You do that on your own time, and we'll meet back as soon as we're done. All right, hopefully that went well for you. I've copied all of those in and just changed out the text. Again, you were just copying that div down that had a grid gap of 3 and then changing out the text inside. Now, you may notice that these aren't quite properly aligned, so I think we need to go back up top here. And I think the problem might be in how we've spaced these items out. So I actually don't need this spacing until we're on small. All right, so there we go. So now they should be just fine. And then when I get small, then I want them to space out. Now that almost works, but I have another problem here, which is now it's not applying this to here because there's no item before. Again, the way the spacing works is it's kind of like that weird margin trick. So maybe what we should do is just abandon the spacing altogether. Why don't we just do gap of 6? And I think that should take care of our problem. And then the other thing we should probably do is add margin to this as well, or padding to all of these. So 1, 2, 3, these should all have the same padding as their children so that they look similar when they're stretched out like that. All right, while we're making adjustments, let's do one more thing and then we'll call this good. So if I come back up to the actual footer itself and I look inside to this wrapper, I do want to space out these items a little bit more. So let's go ahead and since we're already putting gaps on flexes, let's just do it again. So I'll do something like gap of 12 and that way it spaces it out nicely. All right, let's test this just to make sure everything looks correct. We get the large screen sizes and that looks great. All that works properly. If I click in here, I get this green cursor and the button sits over this way. Okay, that looks nice. Down here, same thing. If I get a little bit smaller, let's see how this wraps. Okay, so we're getting some weird breaking here, so I might need to actually adjust that padding X to maybe be a little bit smaller. I think the rest of that looks fine though. So let's just change that and we'll call this section good. Next time we'll work on this email address. All right, so let me grab this padding X4 right here, hit Command D until I basically tick through all the things in my footer. And now let's change these all to padding X of 2. Let's see if that fixed our problem. It looks like it worked. Well, we're going to call this good. Thanks so much for following along. I will catch you in the next one. Happy coding.